All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're opening another chapter in the saga of the Warmongers, Kermit, Hochi, and me. And we had quite an interesting live debate here about why Europe is not able or not willing to put some demands or a treaty on the table in front of Vladimir Putin and say, these are our demands, Ukraine agrees with this, this, and this. We're willing to compromise on these points, you do this, and that's it. It's because we've accepted a subordinate role where the Russians don't talk to us, they don't see us as equals, and a subordinate role where the American president negotiates on our behalf, who apparently has gotten tired of it, because now he's saying he'd rather deal with Iran and is telling Mr. Friedrich Merz to handle Ukraine. So according to the American president, the Germans will be dealing with Ukraine now. But that brings us to why we are not seen as an equal partner for negotiations. One fact is that maybe we can't rise above the fact that there are 27 of us, that we are fragmented, that we don't have the confidence to say, hey, here we are, negotiate with us, no one else can negotiate this with you, we are the strongest and most capable here, Trump is senile, probably no one has the courage to say this. But besides that, even if someone had that kind of courage, it has to be backed up by some hard power, and unfortunately that hard power just isn't in Europe right now, even though work is being done on it. And for example, we have Security Action for Europe here, the so-called SEC, SAFE, which is basically European money for armaments meant to support rearmament. All right, guys, do you have it open, that link? So if you scroll down a bit, here you can see the national investment plans for defense approved by the European Commission. And these are actually the funds that should be allocated to individual countries for the development of their defense capabilities. Of course, all of this is being done on credit. And the advantage of this debt is that if we were to take on this defense debt as individual states, then we as individual states, if I put it simply and plainly, don't have that much credit worthiness. Yeah, we would get a worse interest rate, we might get less, and we'd have higher payments. This way, when we take it as the European Union and then redistribute it, of course, we have a better position because we have better credit worthiness as the European Union and a better interest rate. So the loan is cheaper when it's collective. And then it's distributed here. As you can see, so far, only some countries have received it, or so far, only some countries have applied for it. The Czech Republic has been allocated 2 billion euros for defense, which is about 50 billion crowns, which is roughly a third or even less, a quarter of the Czech defense budget, if I'm not mistaken. That's right.
That's right, but it's not like we were just allocated it, we actually applied for it.
Sure.
We were granted 2 billion euros. We didn't apply for more.
Which might be a bit of a problem because right here we have an article saying that Czechia applied for the smallest European defense loan out of all the V4 countries. Of course, Poland applied for a huge amount, as we can see. Here I see in these tables, yes, Poland is here, 43 billion euros. I see they're planning to arm themselves mainly with European money, which is cute. But no, of course, this gives Poland huge amounts of money, that's clear. But we applied for relatively little. And that's because our legislation isn't really good. We actually don't have the projects to properly spend it on. Because we don't have the ability to purchase efficiently and quickly, for example.
Like, we could always at least laugh that the Slovaks were worse off, but even the Slovaks got more money than we did. The Slovaks. Half will be stolen and the rest will go to haciendas. The end.
But that's also siphoned off into haciendas.
But in a different column now.
But in a different column.
Maybe those haciendas will look like bunkers, so they'll count for that video.
But it's possible, because if we want to build another military hospital, then why couldn't the Slovaks build more haciendas?
Sure, but as for the military hospital, it won't be counted as defense spending, right? We know that. And these defense funds will be allocated mainly for the purchase of Leopard tanks, if I read that correctly. And otherwise, we really don't have anything else to spend it on, because if I understood it correctly, we just don't have a proper investment plan for defense. We actually don't have a concept of what we really want. We don't have it. We just bought some fighter jets here. We bought some armored vehicles. Yes, some tanks or something. But all those purchases were like, we're doing it now and we actually don't know what will happen next. For nay.
No, I don't agree. We know what the army needs because the army said what it needs.
All right, but the politicians haven't prepared it, are they?
Thank you. There are more problems. Either it's not prepared according to the legislation, or it's prepared incorrectly and doesn't meet part of the legislation, so it can't be done. At the same time, a huge problem is that we want to buy it as the Czech Republic. That means we're approaching someone to make it for us, and therefore it will be more expensive. If it were to be produced for 4 European Union countries at once, it would be cheaper. We could see something similar with those vehicles. I can't remember what they were called now. I think they were British supercats.
I don't know what you're talking about.
They're kind of like light vehicles for infantry, primarily for paratroopers.
Is that happening now, or was it earlier when paratrooper vehicles were bought?
That was maybe about a year ago.
Yeah, okay.
Half a year to a year.
Then I must be missing something. Anyway, we were buying something like that there. We bought 3 pieces again, and it cost a lot, as I'm used to with the Czech army.
Yes, something like that. We just wanted to buy a few pieces, and of course we bought it ourselves, so it cost a huge amount of money. And about 3 to 6 months before us, 3 countries bought it together, and it cost them about 20% less.
Well, it almost seems to me that at the Ministry of Defense, they should work a bit more in cooperation with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and just interact more with their foreign colleagues. It seems to me that our Minister of Defense and the Ministry of Defense in general are really closed-minded, and it's actually a place that's kind of stale, kind of musty. It's not dynamic at all. Maybe it's because there are so many rules that have to be followed when something is bought and so on. But there should be some kind of active diplomacy working here at the level of the Ministry of Defense, or maybe in cooperation with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which would lead exactly to this, going out, finding out who, what, and whether it could be done together.
The European Union could help with that. Since we have European funds here to arm ourselves, it would be best for us to spend that European money in Europe. And here we have world-class capacities that are able to produce certain weapons. Yeah, just off the top of my head, we have a joint project here now, unless you've already stopped it. There's the project for the new fighter jet 3 generation, where the French insisted that they want to lead it, so it got a bit stalled. We have Germany here, which makes Leopards. We have France, which makes Leclercs, and we have imported Korean K2 tanks here.
Imported, they will be produced here in Poland, but of course it will be under license. But imported, when you say imported, it sounds strange. Well, of course, but that's not exactly what the SAFE program is about, right? Exactly, because of the joint loan.
That's what bothers me about it, that it could have been partially resolved and it could have basically just been divided. Aha, so the Hungarians simply need howitzers. So either the Czechs will make them, maybe the latest Dana howitzers, or the French will make Caesar howitzers on Tatra chassis.
That's exactly what I meant, right? This perfectly proves that we don't have a plan, especially here in the Czech Republic, because in order to apply for and receive this money, you have to present to Europe what you're going to spend it on. In other words, you have to present them with some kind of concept of what you want to do, right? And they have to approve it. And we weren't able to present a concept for any long-term force development, anything long-term, so at most we could just apply for those Leopards and that was it. We just weren't ready.
I would compare it to what we said a few updates back, and that is, when you have a skinny person and you bring them a truckload of food, they won't magically gain weight. When the army has been severely underfunded for the last 30 years, you just can't fix it in a year, you can't fix it in 2 years, you can't fix it in 3 years, you need a specific plan for that, you need... Simply so that when the money comes in, you already have 40 options ready for where you can allocate it. That's all you need to say.
But we don't have it ready, we don't have it prepared, and to get something ready, you don't really need money as much as you need capable officials, some kind of plan, some kind of concept, and maybe legislation that will allow you ty nákupy například provádět. And I feel like the previous government really messed this up badly because for some reason they didn't do any of this. And besides that, the same people are still working at the Ministry of Defense, the same officials who caused our defense to be worthless. And those purchases just mostly weren't handled well, they weren't fast, they weren't transparent, and they ended up costing more, which I think is a good argument for supporting the Competency Act or the Civil Service Act. I'm not exactly sure what the law is called. However, it's a law that will allow for firing more officials and ministry staff depending on which politician is currently in office.
That's not the officials' fault. Those officials are acting according to some law. Those officials can't just say like, oh, we met here with Peppa and agreed with Peppa that we're going to buy leopards. This one just doesn't work. Whenever something is handled like this, it's always handled according to some law. And here I agree with you, the previous government did nothing to improve that law or made a new one that would guide us, that would make things easier for us.
Well, of course, these purchases of the F-35S Leopards and the completion of the CV-90S, all of that occurred under a special procedure. And instead of implementing some systematic measures here, they just introduced some special procedures. But the problem with a special procedure is that you can't really fit it into a proper plan.
Alright, it's not that the officials didn't want to buy anything, as someone already told me. And at the same time, the previous government had military modernization as one of its priorities. The government doesn't prioritize that. When they were cutting items in the ministries, they also made cuts in the army. When we committed to increasing it, what we actually did was cut it.
And the argument they're using now is that legislatively our country isn't ready for procurement, so it doesn't really make sense to spend when we don't have a proper way to spend effectively, right? Back under the previous government, which in 4 whole years failed to make the process of increasing the country's defense more efficient, they really had 4 years to do something about this, so it wouldn't be such a disaster. Of course, I don't really understand how these purchases work, what all has to be done, and so on, but I do understand that buying backpacks for soldiers takes 6 years. Which is just crap. That's just crap. The previous government was supposed to change that since they claimed defense was a priority.
Now we're in a situation
that the current government doesn't have defense as a priority and can make excuses that the previous government did or didn't create any legislation that could be used effectively. No. A může se vymlouvat that you first have to change the legislation so it makes sense. He's apparently saying that they're increasing spending, right? Even though GDP, well...
Hey, I'll try to challenge it for you. You said that it doesn't make sense to buy military technologies and weapons because it doesn't really work properly and it's not 100% reliable. So you won't go to work unless you make at least 50,000.
I wouldn't even get out of bed for 50,000, no. The thing is, they have the opportunity right now to say, look, if we started doing all those tenders and purchases now, we'd have to do it according to the current rules, which are crap. We have to change those rules first somehow. The system needs to be overhauled in some way, and only then will it make sense to put money into it, right?
Exactly, but it won't, because the more bureaucracy there is, the more expensive it gets, and the more money you'll just spend on it.
But I'm telling you what their argument is, right?
And I'm telling you it's bullshit.
Okay, great. However, I think we can agree that the system we use here is just terribly slow, and because of that, there hasn't really been a proper opportunity or ability to create a defense plan that we could then present to the European Union so they'd give us that favorable loan, right? For that safe.
We agree on that.
And by the way, Fiala could have done that with Chernochova too. They could have prepared some kind of purchase plan that could then be presented. They knew for 2 years that SAFE was coming. and they did nothing. No, it's not that they did nothing, but they just kept going in this mode. Let's buy Leopards, let's buy F-35S because of marketing, because it looks good, you know. But in reality, when it comes to the actual capabilities of the army, they helped. They didn't help at all. It was always the case here that they'd rather buy some tanks that look good in photos than provide soldiers with their basic needs, so that they wouldn't have to walk around in worn out, falling apart old 95 uniforms, basically.
Yeah, sure. What grabs people's attention more? Is it by showing them, here we bought new tanks, or by telling them, here we bought new underwear for the soldiers so their balls don't hang out through a hole, man?
Well, of course. Naturally, they did make some of these purchases. Last year, or maybe it was this year, probably last year, the winter jackets finally arrived. Hooray! So the soldiers have winter jackets. Great. But it's like too little, too late, right? Too little, too late.
Now that we have the winter jackets, we can take the result to the Kremlin, right? Let's squeeze the panders, both of them.
So the point here is that if you don't have winter jackets, you have to shop at Decathlon. It's just undignified when your soldier has to buy winter clothes at Decathlon.
I mean, it's undignified, but what are you supposed to do? We keep running into the same problem over and over again. There's no plan. And even if there was a plan, there's no money. And when there's no money, there's no plan. And once again, we end up in a spiral.
Yeah, sure, but by the way, there's one question here. People say it's the army's fault. No, the army definitely keeps saying what it needs, provides some documents explaining why it needs it, and then the ministry has to deal with it and make the purchase this time. The army isn't here to buy things. The army is here to defend this country. The things it will use for defense should be provided by the office, meaning the Ministry of Defense. The army is basically a purchaser for the army, more like administrative support for the army, right? No.
Well, that's how it is. The army has been saying for a long time what it needs, and the army prioritizes what it needs the most. Yeah, it just handles the most urgent projects.
And that's another thing that undermines the possibility of planning and the fact that we simply haven't agreed on it, or that the governments across the political spectrum aren't willing to agree on whether these expenditures should happen or not, and what we're going to do about it, right? And when you don't know what your defense spending will be next year, it's hard to plan. But I don't think that's an excuse for not having it. There's nothing really prepared here for the SAFE program, because the SAFE program is exactly for getting that money through a favorable loan. Yeah, if you don't have it yourself, thank you.
I don't know what to tell you. The army has been saying for a long time what it wants, what it needs. And it's basically like if you were saying, I just need salami, ham, eggs, bread, rolls, and milk. That's what I really need, but what I need the most are rolls and water just to survive. You prioritize what's most urgent and in the worst shape.
Well, but in the Czech army, almost everything is messed up.
Yes, and the problem is that we told ourselves we're in NATO now.
And that's why I think, sorry for interrupting you, and that's why I think that when I know everything is messed up, I should have a ton of plans. What should I spend the money on? And we just have a measly 2 billion in the plan.
Well, and we can't have everything planned out what we're gonna buy when for years and years we haven't had the money for it.
But SAFE is there so you can send your requests, and then the EU will tell you, okay, great plans, here's money for half of it.
Yes.
So those plans are supposed to exist. Those plans are supposed to exist even if you don't have the money for them. Just like I plan to buy a car, even though I don't have the money for it right now. But I know that if someone came to me right now and said, hey, write me a plan for what you need, I'll give you the money for it, then I'd write it down, give it to them and say, hey, furniture, shoes, cars, a car, a fridge, man, give me the money. And he says, here you go, 1% interest, enjoy it, right? That's basically the deal, right? And we're not even able to give Europe the paper that says what we actually want, what we're going to buy, what's planned, how we intend to use it, what it's for, and so on and so on. We don't have this ability. It's brutally underestimated. Even Breeza says that, the security expert. He's a bit odd sometimes, of course, but in this regard, I agree with him.
Yes, I know, Briza, and you brought up the comparison that you would write down that you need a car, more things, and so on, right? But the situation and the way the situation works is that you wrote down that you want a car, that your other priorities might be things for the home, a garden, hobbies, and so on. But now the situation is that you wrote it all down, but your wife came and said, "But I don't want a car. I want a new kitchen." And the priority is simply a new kitchen, and the car just doesn't matter.
Thank you. Well, okay, but what if the person who said, "Show me what you want," said it can only be in the area of what men want to buy, meaning, like here we have the area of what will serve for defense, then at that moment this rule takes the wife out of the equation, right? Just like here, we simply have to present the requirements for what we want to do and what Europe is supposed to give us money for, and we aren't even able to do that. Sure, I can see what you're writing in the chat, that these things are planned, but they're not started because nobody from the government will approve the money, but here there's no need for any government approval. Here, you just need to take the paper that supposedly says what we want, if it's really planned, and give it to the EU and say we want this because... and we weren't able to do this.
You're going in circles again. We're going in circles, like it's planned, but it's not a government priority, so the government isn't dealing with it. The army knows what it wants. The army knows it. But that's exactly it. The ministry isn't dealing with it. The ministry may handle it, but the government isn't.
The ministry definitely couldn't have solved it during their 3 months in power.
I'm not talking about the government, I'm talking in general. The army says what it needs. The Ministry of Defense has to provide that. For the Ministry of Defense to provide that, they need to have confirmed funding to know how much of the budget they'll get this year, and based on that, they'll greenlight 3 projects and put 4 on hold.
So you want to tell me that there are just projects from Fiala's government here and Zuna just doesn't put them forward at the European level?
Because he doesn't know if... yeah, there's a lot of that. It's not just about this.
Well, in that case, I might even call it treason if someone offers him money for defense and he decides not to deliver it.
I don't know, like, what do you want me to say? Like, let's go and shoot him, or I'm distancing myself from any kind of provocation, and no.
I just don't agree with the idea that there are some projects here that could be put forward at the European level and our Ministry of Defense didn't do it, even though there's money just hanging in the air.
Because we don't want to deal with the army, because we want peace, and at the same time we allocate these subsidies to Agrofert.
What do I think? I mean, what you're saying doesn't make sense. That's a whole different kind of money. No.
Because Agrofert will build the military hospital.
But now it's totally different.
No, I was already making a bit of a joke out of it because we're just going around in circles here. Over and over again.
It seems we completely misunderstood each other. So what's your position then?
My position is that procurement needs to be addressed legislatively.
Per?
Where this tender process is simply shortened as much as possible. At the same time, there'll be some pre-screening about what they talked about last time, that if I simply want infantry weapons, then they produce infantry weapons. Brem Cold, the French, the Germans. And I'll just have some companies from which I'll get ongoing pricing, and I'll see how the price changed over time. Yeah, just make a simple Excel spreadsheet where I'll have written down Leopard in 2021 cost 10 billion euros. Now it costs 20 billion euros because steel just got more expensive. Thank you, please.
You're really saying some wild stuff here, saying it's Zuna's fault. But actually, even the article itself contradicts you because according to earlier information from the Ministry of Defense, Czechia sent the European Commission a plan to use up to 2 billion euros, which is exactly what we got from the SAFE program for Leopard 2 A8 tanks, Tatra T8-15 vehicles, and further construction of the D11 highway. The plans were submitted by the end of last November during Petr Fiala's government. So Petr Fiala submitted the plans completely out of his ass, and of course Babiš didn't change anything.
Yeah.
This is the previous government's fault. Don't deny it.
But I'm not saying it's not. I'm talking about the ministry. I'm not talking about the current minister.
And
I didn't mention Zuna in that sense. I'm talking about the ministry.
well, it seems to me that we were arguing here about who neglected defense more, whether it was Fiala or Babiš.
No, everyone has ignored it for the past 30 years.
Fair.
Yeah, and now we can talk about who slacked off the most.
What pisses me off the most is that even Fiala, who was always talking big about security and armament, slacked off too.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, if he said, I'm not gonna arm up, I don't care about any of you. Fair, like, well, okay. But, you know, he talks a big game about arming up and then sends less money than the Slovaks. Or, like, fewer plans than the Slovaks. Well, that's just... Yeah.
We should deport him to Slovakia for that?
To Cyprus, dude.
To Cyprus, yeah, alright.
No.
Send him to the Slovak Tatras.
Yeah, for example, Denmark didn't even apply for anything because Denmark doesn't really need to, right? Because Denmark already has its military in pretty good shape, yeah. Poland applied for actually crazy amounts like 43 billion because they don't have enough money and want to arm themselves like crazy, you know. But all those countries, actually Romania, the lousy Hungarians, you know, Lithuania, Bulgaria, damn Bulgaria, managed to put together bigger armament plans than the Czechs under Petr Fiala. That's it. That's the focus on security. Man, it's a good thing he didn't win the election. We only have a chance for something solid in the opposition because he didn't win. No. Alright, look, since we're talking about armament, we have two pieces of news here. Poland wants to have a 500,000 strong army. It's already one of the biggest in NATO. And apparently they want to pay for it with European money. And right next to that, Germany dreams of having the strongest army in Europe, but it's running into a harsh reality. In other words, people in Germany just aren't interested, and Germany also doesn't have the money it could spend on defense. Hey, what's the deal with the Poles? Who do you think will end up having the biggest army in Europe? Will it be the Poles, or will the Germans manage to do it? Because it seems completely logical to me that the most populous country with the strongest economy and the strongest industry should have the strongest army. That seems so logical to me, like basic common sense. That means Germany. But the problem is probably that Germans are not interested in military service.
It comes from history, when they actually had the strongest army twice and it led to total disasters.
Wait, you're oversimplifying it. West Germany was armed like crazy during the Cold War.
Yes, because it bordered East Germany.
Well, sure, so now Germany has a border with Poland, okay, but Russia is just around the corner, right?
No, it's about the German mindset. They've just been taught since World War II that the army is bad. Let's solve everything diplomatically.
That's not true, that's a myth. During the Cold War, they had a strong army. East Germans were militarized because of the communists. That's not true. Yes.
And how many years since the revolution in Germany?
If there was ever a pacifist movement, it was right after the Cold War. I disagree with the idea they've been brainwashed since the Cold War ended, as I don't think that's true. If anything, they've been influenced since the 90s, for example. But even in 2011, there was still mandatory military service there, which they abolished back then, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't know when they abolished mandatory military service in Germany, but I don't remember the name of that chancellor, Merkel. So she basically promoted the idea that we don't need to have a strong army because we have enough political clout to keep everyone from causing trouble.
So number one, on July 1st, 2011, compulsory military service was abolished. military service, or Germany officially suspended compulsory military service. So suspended. So they had it for 6 years longer than we did. So Germany wasn't doing that badly, but in 2011, any effort on their part to stay militarily capable came to an end. I'm not saying they were going on foreign missions excessively or that they were somehow expansionist, of course not. But I wouldn't say that their army has been useless since the end of World War II.
I didn't say that. I'm just saying that the historical experience speaks clearly. And in Germany, Christian Democrats have been in power for the last 20 years, which has had a significant impact on the army.
And the socialists.
And the socialists, of course. Yeah, which greatly affected the army. Yeah, it's kind of like what happened here. We joined NATO and our politicians thought, so why should we spend 2% now if we don't need to? We can cut it down to 1% and put that 1% into anything, from culture to pensions.
All right.
So, Germany. Well, why did Germany maintain such a huge, strong army for such a long time when it wasn't needed, when it wouldn't use it?
So basically, the biggest problem for Germany is that, first of all, they won't be interested because they haven't raised people to be interested in the army. That's the first point. The second point is that they have a welfare state, so the army has nothing to offer the Germans. We have the same problem, that the army has nothing to offer except that it could compete with salaries, which will be even worse in Germany, competing with military wages, because there you simply have much greater earning opportunities. Besides that, of course, there's a lack of nationalism, which is pretty much suppressed among the Germans. And then I would say, of course, the army is underfunded, plus there is no military service. So I would say that in the end, if they want to have a strong army, they'll have to resort to military service, simply restore it. And what did Angela Merkel cancel in 2011? They'll have to reintroduce it. Because Angela Merkel cancelled a lot of things. She cancelled nuclear power, she cancelled military service, she messed up everything she could, and obviously it was all shit.
And with this bombshell, we say goodbye for today.
Definitely not, because I'm still interested in the fact that, for example, during the Cold War, Germany had 500,000 soldiers and 800,000 reservists. Today, including reservists, it has a total of 240,000. And even though the money is going into it, there's just no interest. They'll have to force the Germans into the army. Well,
they had no other choice either.
Meanwhile, the Poles, could they handle it? The Poles have nationalism, right? No one ever stopped them from being proud, did they? Thanks.
The Poles have something to go back to.
Yes. And besides, I feel like life in Poland isn't that great overall, so the army actually has something to offer. Unlike in Germany.
In Poland, unlike in Germany, but they're running into a demographic crisis.
Well, Germany also has a demographic crisis. Well,
but it's on a whole other scale than in Poland.
Can you elaborate on that? Do you have any evidence to support it?
So Poland is dying out, right?
Unlike Germany, everyone is dying out. Germany is dying out too.
Well, but Germany's total population is still increasing, unlike Poland, right?
Really?
I checked.
Of course, Poland is declining. We know that. There are 65,665 Czechs living in Germany. So we would still need 1,001 more Czechs to move to Germany. So it would be absolutely hellish.
Thank you. So the Germans were growing until 1924. Well, now it's kind of stagnating. When we look at Poland...
Yeah, it's true that in Germany, what's pretty striking is that the younger generation is basically rotten to the core. The girls are far left, the guys are far right, and nobody wants to join the army. It's awful. It's awful. But the Poles are tough. I'm thinking more and more about maybe moving to Poland, that I'll just leave this place behind, man, and I'll go to a country that has a future. Damn. We'll see after the elections if PS gets into power and how they'll restart things. Yeah.
I'm afraid that PIS will weaken and the current government will weaken too.
So that's the civic coalition, right? PIS is the opposition today.
Yes, yes. That's what I'm saying. Both the opposition and the coalition will weaken, and the fascist will grow.
Really? You think fascism is going to rise in Poland, huh?
They already had nearly 15% there.
Okamura has about the same here too, right? Oh, all right.
Okamura has to join forces with 4 parties.
Okamura, if you add the communists too, which I'd say is similar, if you add some of those Nazis from the motorists to that, the fascists are more fragmented here, but I think their numbers are about the same, like in Poland.
I won't argue, but in Poland it was about 15%, and fascists in Slovakia got 10% in the last election. They made it into the European Parliament.
Yeah, and of course about Germany, right? So maybe it's growing or kind of stagnating, but the population makeup is changing in terms of what percentage of the population are, let's say, Germans, and what percentage are, I was talking about the overall various Africans and so on, right?
I was talking in overall numbers.
Yes, it's hard to say how enthusiastic a Muslim who's been living there for 3 years or a Turk living in Germany would be about serving in the German army when his goal was to open a kebab house, right?
Well, I don't know, like Simir Gerhan has been serving in the German police for how many years, right?
Simir Gerhan mainly serves on film crews, so
Yes, for more than 20 years now.
yes, but he serves proudly. No. But otherwise, of course, what's good in Germany is that they invest, right? They invest well. The Poles invest too. The money goes into it, right? Money is where it starts. How do you get people there? Look, you can always introduce mandatory military service, right? You beat up a few protesters and that's it. I think Germany has set out on the path of rearmament and on the path to being strong and having a big army again. When Germany sets out in a certain direction, it always takes a really long time before it changes course in any way. So it seems to me that if they've already set out, they'll eventually reach their goal.
Well, I guess we can agree on that. The question is how long it will take and how successful they'll actually be in the end, but they'll get there.
Exactly. Well, when it comes to Poland's rearmament, they're a bit problematic because they're all over the place. I think they want to turn themselves into a Ukrainian army, or I'm not entirely sure. And they're buying everything that has wheels, yeah. That might actually be the biggest problem, that they're really putting a lot into the army, but it also doesn't seem to me like they really know what they want. Yeah, so they want 500,000, which, like, hey, good luck with that. But when it comes to the equipment, you know, they've still got Leopards, now they've got Abrams, they've got those K2 Black Panthers that have been Polish modified, so that's basically 3 tanks they have in service. 3 types, completely different from each other. And to me, considering it's Poland, which isn't exactly the richest country, that's really terrible. It's the same with fighter jets, they have various types. It's like, you know, it's kind of like they really wanted to have the best army as quickly as possible, so they were buying at a time when production was really low, and so in the end, the numbers probably match up. But it seems to me that the Polish army must be quite a solid logistical nightmare.
Definitely, because now with this logistical nightmare, you reminded me of that beautiful incident when the Polish army lost an entire train loaded with mines. Thank you. And in the end, it was found in IKEA.
So with this bombshell, are we saying goodbye for today?
With these bombs in IKEA,
With the bomb at IKEA, we say goodbye for now. Thanks for watching and good night.
good night, everyone. Replay viewers, remember you can watch the full stream as members and on Hero Hero. And thank you so much to everyone who supported this content through the QR code, likes, sharing, subscribing, super chat, and all the other amazing ways, because don't forget that you live in a great, rich, and free country where you can send streamers as much money as you can and want. So that's a big advantage of our society. Have a great time, and yeah, see you next time. Kermit and Ho Chi are saying goodbye, and of course, so am I.